Hello and welcome back. This is Sherry with Heart and Soulful back in the studio today. We are working on our volume 2 of the Vintage Grunge Journal based on a ghost town called Bodie. And if you are just joining me for the very first time, welcome. I hope if you like this video, you'll give me a thumbs up and click on subscribe so you don't miss out on any future videos. Down in the description, I will be putting a link to volume 1, which is the volume that I did last year, so that you can watch that if you missed out on that. And then I'm in a different playlist, which I will also put down below. I will be covering all of volume 2. So far, all we have done is there's 2 episodes, and we made this hardcover from recycled food boxes. And a couple of things I wanted to point out after the last video. I had set this, to dry with some weight on it. I did not have to use any other glue. Art glitter glue worked fine. This is all just mounted on the outside. It doesn't go through. The one thing I did do is I went back and I added another really good layer of glue after it had dried so that I could capture all these sharp edges. I'm working with rusty metal, and so if you're not familiar with doing that, number one, you want to have a tetanus shot, so in case you cut yourself or anything like that, that you don't get sick. And then you could wear gloves. I've worked with rusty metal forever, so I just, make sure I'm careful. But, it is pokey, especially when you're folding it and different things. So just, be careful when you're working with that. So I'm going to set that aside because I don't really need that today. What we're working on now are the insides, putting together our papers and things, and kind of thinking about our signatures. Now, I don't know if you're doing the same kind of theme or a different theme, but the grungy feel. So some of this may apply or not. But really, you could be doing this a totally different theme and still working with the same materials. So I wanted to kind of cover a couple things about my signatures. One thing I hadn't pointed out is, if you'll notice, my signatures are not the same size. So as you're kind of going through this, mine has a theme where each signature represents a building or maybe a couple of buildings in this ghost town. And my first signature, because of everything that I wanted to include in it, is much bigger than my other 2. In fact, it's probably on its own almost as big as these 2 put together. So I'm just pointing that out. Don't worry if they're not exactly the same size. We're not going to put them in the book until the end. So you can see that I don't have them equally distanced apart when I sewed them in, because I wanted them to kind of sit nice and even in my book. So I'm just pointing that out so that you don't feel like you're stuck to a certain number of pages in each signature. So I decided I would kind of go through this one, and I'm going to refer back to it to kind of figure out how I wanted to mix up my papers within each signature. And because mine are such a specific building or whatever, I have certain types of papers I want to put in each one. But I want some continuity across the whole book. So I'm going to put some that are the same in each one. For example, I liked my signatures to kind of be divided by the same papers. And I kind of wanted to show how that worked, because if you want to alternate, you kind of have to think about it ahead. So for example, I wanted my front cover to be a vellum page. If you've watched this one or even watched the first 2 episodes, I keep referring back to the fact that you look at Bodie by looking through the windows and doorways. You don't get to go in. So I wanted to have the book have that kind of feel. So I've used vellum on the front, my title page. And then the next page, I wanted to use something that was tissue-y like, just to kind of obscure what was coming next. And I ended up using baking parchment. And I realized as I was starting to put just the front covers of my signatures that I needed to address adhesives, because not everything sticks to everything. And the other thing that I have done a lot in this one is I print on vellum, I print on fabric, and that kind of thing. So I thought this would be a good video to kind of address how to print on vellum if you've never done that, the different things you can use to cut or tear it, reinforce it, adhesives to use. Same with the baking paper. And then just some other ideas I had. I ended up starting to make paper again. So I wanted to share some of those things with you today. So I'll cover Vellum, I think, the first, because that's the beginning of my book. So my very first title page, I have printed on Vellum, and I'm also using it as a page. Now, if you're going to use it as a page, you need to reinforce it, because when you fold Vellum in half, it's going to crack. Even if it doesn't right away, it's just the nature. It's kind of a brittle paper. So I have my piece here that I have folded, and you can see once you make that crease, that might end up, you know, tearing out over time, especially once you start poking holes to sew it into your book. So I decided that what I would use, you could use tape if you're doing a different thing, but I would use some of my, the fabric that I rusted out. It doesn't matter how wide it is, really. It can be different widths. You just want to cover that folded part. So I've torn a piece. My pages ended up being 5 inches this way and 6 7/8 this way. So I ended up just cutting a piece. This one's probably about 1.5 inches wide. And then I had to decide what I had used to glue it down. I couldn't remember. So I did an experiment, and I'm going to share that with you, of the different options you have for gluing that down and how they work. So the first one that I had tried was using glue stick, and I used this purple one, the washable school glue. You might have a different brand that you like. For this, if you're going to use glue stick, I would use your driest glue stick, because any moisture that you add to Vellum, you can see it will make the paper curl and that kind of thing. I did not, when I did this, I didn't glue it and then put it under a book right away. That might help. So you could try that if you're going to end up using a glue stick. It worked well. I really just need it to stay on that. It's going to end up getting sewn in. So fabric was a good choice. But, you know, if I pulled really hard, I could pull this apart, you know, but it sticks pretty well. So it would totally work. So that was one. Then I used art glitter glue. And if you're not familiar, this is just one of my, it pretty much glues everything together. So I used it, but it does make it, you know, it's wet. So you can see how it kind of makes your paper wonky. Again, I didn't let it dry under a book. That probably would have helped. But it works, and it's really strong. It's actually stronger than the glue stick. So you can use some kind of glue. Again, I would choose your driest glue if you do that. My favorite way, though, ended up being my Xyron sticker maker. And I also have done tests with double stick tape, that kind of thing. So that would be similar to this. But this is just easy because to do double stick tape on that big of a piece of fabric, you know, I mean, it works, but I have the sticker maker, so I'm going to use it. So the one that I have is 2.5 inches wide. It comes 5 inches wide. And when you see the next thing where I'm trying to stick a picture on something that's bigger, I probably need to get the 5-inch one because I do use this all the time. So this is only about 1.5 inches, so it'll fit. And for some reason, I do this with ribbon all the time, and I don't have this problem, but for some reason, this fabric, when I start to roll it, it's gonna roll it on itself. So I just kind of watch and grab that first little bit. I don't know if you could see that, just so that it doesn't roll up. And then you're just gonna crank it, and all that does is put sticker backing on whatever you put through there. Now, the one that I have in there right now happens to be repositionable tape adhesive. It also comes in permanent, but that's just what I have in there. And it's fine for this because it's gonna hold it. So I just want to carefully peel this off, and I'm being careful because sometimes the sticky back might stick to my paper and not my fabric. But it's pretty sticky, so I'm just gonna kind of, it doesn't really do this so much with paper if you're doing something paper. But see, I'm gonna kind of peel it off my fabric, kind of works well. Okay, and then it's super sticky, so I'm gonna kind of just follow my grid lines so that I could kind of get this centered when I lay my, find something that looks center, kind of there. And then take your folded side and then just kind of plop it down. Even though this is repositional, it's pretty sticky, so I really kind of want to get it in my first shot. And I like this because it is, it's dry, so nothing gets wet or wonky. And it's just going to reinforce my spine. Just like that. And then that way when that gets sewn in, I don't have to worry about this breaking apart. So that was the first thing that I needed to do. I prepared 3 of those. I'm not sure I'll end up using them all. When I look at the way this book went, I did my first signature, which is what I'm working on for my second volume. I'm working the first signature first. I have my vellum on the outsides. And then the next one I had, and this was mostly because this is the way I wanted this signature to look, not necessarily too worried about the following ones, but I wanted that little bit of tissue in there. So I'm using the baking paper. That would be my next thing that goes into mine. And then from there I can add my other papers. So for my cover thing here, I had already printed out another one of these pictures. This is a photo. This one's in color. All the other ones I did in black and white. I ran them through a filter on my phone that made them look like an antique photo, and then I printed them out that way. And those are the ones that I will have available for you, the ones that are already made to look like old photos, because I took them, they're in color, they're current. This one happened to be a billboard that they have right at the entrance that had this nice kind of little overview of the whole town. And it's kind of like a paint, it wasn't a photograph, it was more like a painting, drawing kind of thing, I think, from my memory. So I took a picture of that billboard, and this is in color then. I had already printed this for my first volume, and I'm going to show you what I ended up doing. I had printed it out, and I had put it on this kind of baking parchment, and it didn't stick. So I had pulled it up, but you could see through this. I don't know if you can, maybe you can if I get close enough. Do you see kind of like a kind of a pattern in the tape? I used a double stick tape, but I used one of these dispensers. And when you do this dispenser, it has that kind of pattern on it. And so that showed through my vellum. So I used it for this. It was fine. I had printed it out. I had used my antique, distress vintage photo around the edge. So it kind of hide it. It's not going to bug me too much, but this one has it too because I had already put the adhesive on it. I went ahead and added to it because it doesn't stick so great. And I did some experiments for that too, is putting vellum on vellum, what works the best. And this one is with double stick tape. And I don't know, I'll have to look up what brand this is because I don't have a container anymore. But this is just 1/4-inch double stick tape. And that works well. And then it doesn't have that dispenser sort of hashtaggy kind of pattern on it. So just regular old double stick tape will stick vellum to vellum just fine. If you did something wet like a glue, either a glue stick or the art glitter, you're going to get ripples. And I really don't want that on my cover page. So I just used double stick tape. And again, you can see the hashtag through it. That's because I had already put that other tape on it from before. So I'm just trying to, use the one I had already printed out. So that's going to be my cover. Then the next page was the baking paper, which that's really hard to stick anything to. So I did, you see my other little samples of things I tried. So this is the baking paper. This is the double stick tape. You can see it does nothing. It doesn't even hold it on there. So not the best thing. The fabric I did with my Xyron. Now it comes off, but it sticks too. So you could totally get away with doing that. and especially if it's for your own use, it will stick on there okay, and at least it's then flat. It doesn't get all ripply and wet, but it does come off. So that is an option. Then on this one, I did art glitter glue, and I think that's what I mostly ended up using in my book. Now, if I pull that really hard, that will come off. I'm already kind of pulling it off, but it does stick. So my recommendation for that is if you're going to use art glitter glue, and you can see where it got wet, just use it around the edge. And if you're going to do it on fabric, maybe instead of having like a total line of it, kind of smooth it out before you stick that on there, and then at least it'll be flat and it won't be kind of ripply. So nothing is the greatest for baking paper because it's meant for things to not stick. For my journal, the one that I did before, whenever I didn't stick a lot of things to my paper. It was more of a divider liner, not to put anything on. On the back of this signature, because it was coming to my end, I did want to put this on. So I've put fabric onto this, and I didn't stitch it all the way through. And on this, I just used the art glitter glue. Now you can see how ripply it is, but it's okay. You know, it's stuck down. Now I can pull that apart if I wanted to, but you know, if you're not trying to, it's okay. You could sew it down. You know, I sewed, this is vellum onto fabric, onto the baking paper. And I just did that more decoratively, but you could sew it, that then you'd see your threads through here. So I'm just pointing it out as different options. I'll look through here and see where else I put used vellum. And so this is vellum, and on this one I just sewed it to my page. I have vellum here. This one is glued down and stitched. This one I poked holes, you know, like with just a needle, just poking the holes, and then hand stitched it through. This one I have vellum attached to my scrim, and that is put down with art glitter glue. And that's, you know, that's holding. Vellum to fabric actually works pretty well. So I've used quite a few vellum pockets in this one. This one is also a vellum pocket. And again, this one is only glued down with art glitter glue also. And that worked out fine. And you can see I folded that photo over. So you see a little bit of it here and here. And, you know, that's a fold, but it's doing okay because it's you know, attached to paper, so it does have some reinforcement. This whole side's glued down, so you just kind of want to keep that in mind. You just want to make sure if you're using something fragile as a pocket that you've kind of thought about how the wear and tear might be. This is another vellum photo, glued down probably through my Xyron, I'm gonna guess, and then stuck on fabric, and then I zigzagged around that. This is another vellum pocket. Now it's attached to paper just on these two edges and then sewn. This is a vellum. This is not, it looks like a pattern, and it was from a pattern, but I actually glued that to a piece of vellum just to make it thicker. And then that is glued on too. So, you know, different things work, but on most of them I have it reinforced with either some paper or some stitching of some kind. So those are just, this is also vellum. Okay, so that's kind of dealing with the vellum. I think if you have any questions, if I didn't cover anything about the vellum. Oh, I do want to talk about when you print on vellum. When I printed those other pictures, I printed those with my old Epson printer. And when I printed those on vellum, more times than not, even though my vellum was inkjet vellum, it wouldn't feed through my feeder. For this new printer that I have been putting it, mostly because I'm doing one at a time, through the rear feeder. If you can't get that to go, and I think even my old printer, I couldn't even get it to go through the rear feeder. So I would sort of treat it like I did trying to print on tissue. where you take a piece of 8.5 by 11 copy paper and then to tape it to the edge. Let me show you. We're going to imagine this is just a piece of 8.5 by 11 copy paper, and then I have my vellum on top of that. Let's just say this is the top edge of my vellum. And then what I would do is, this is wall safe tape. You can also use washi tape, and just tape the tiniest little edge, because if you're not printing borderless, you know, you're going to have a little white edge anyway. So just tape the edge and then fold the tape around the back side, trim it off so you don't have any hanging off here. And then you're just going to, you know, run that through the tape side through your printer. The other thing that I found with my new printer is it comes out really wet. All this ink is kind of sitting on top. This is a new, a different vellum than I was using before, and it's also a different printer than I was using before. Now, it could have a right and a wrong side, and I didn't really pay attention. I just stuck it in there. You see how curly that is. When it comes out of the printer and is laying in your tray, leave it sitting there for a bit, because you want it to get that drying before you pick it up, or you're just going to smear everything. I had went ahead and grabbed this one when it was really wet, but immediately when I picked this up, the whole thing just went around itself. So normally I would be able to get it down on my mat here and start drying it with my heat gun before it did that, but this case I didn't. It started curling up way more than my previous one did. So I hung it up on my little clothesline above me and then used my heat gun. And as I did that and dried it, it all just opened up again. They're a little curly now because I've cut them apart already. But I think if I put them under books, and once I get them in, they'll be fine. So to cut this, vellum actually works really well to use a tear ruler. If you want a, you know, you could use these. These are my Wear Memory Keepers tear rulers. And it works really well on this little deckled edge one, or a regular, you know, just a metal ruler or something to cut it if you want to do that, just for, you know, a kind of a ratty edge. I also have Tim Holtz deckle edge trimmer, and that's what I did these on. But my recollection is that the tear ruler I used more before. It's just sometimes hard on vellum to get that little tiny skinny edge off if you just want a tiny piece. Then I found the deckle edge paper trimmer to be better. So you could use that. And then on my photos, even these that are sepia, I still go through and I do my little vintage photo around the edge just to give it that extra kind of layer. So these will be the photos that I'm going to use. This is of the hotel. This is one of the mercantile. And this is another one of the mercantile. And then the inside of the hotel that I had taken through a window. So I will have those available for this signature and the next signature. And so let's see, what's next I want to cover. Okay, so I kind of talked about doing the different things that you could use for the baking paper. I'm going ahead and using the baking paper for this journal because I used it for the first volume. But since then, I have also purchased some tan, really light tan tissue paper. And that might work even, you know, better for sticking things down. I think I did a little test on tissue. So I'll kind of show you that too. So you might want to use tissue if you can find some of the color or whatever that fits with your deal. And it does kind of hold things better. So this is with double stick tape, which works great with the fabric. I can pull it off, but what it's doing is it's pulling the fabric off and leaving the tape on the tissue. So at least it doesn't tear it. And it would totally hold fine for, you know, whatever you're doing. I've done these just on one side, so you can imagine if you did on all four sides, it's gonna hold fine. This was my Xyron sticker maker here. I did the same thing, and that also works and kind of sticks down even better. I'm telling you, that Xyron, it just, because it puts adhesive over the whole thing, you don't have to worry about just doing the edges. And then it does it without, you know, getting you any rippling or anything in here. And then this is with a glue stick. I didn't even try it with art glitter glue because this is so thin, it would just get really wet. But with the glue stick, it also worked fine. So you have, you know, 3 different options for gluing on tissue paper. Okay, so I think that covers the adhesive part. Now, the other thing that I started doing then, I went ahead and, you know, cut my vellums and my baking sheets. And I guess I can show you real quick through here to the next signature, kind of what my thinking was. Don't know how I will do it on the next one, but because I ended with my, you know, I had my baking sheet, this is the back of that first signature, and then my vellum, I already had kind of that see-through to the next one. So I had put a picture on this one, so I went ahead and I did a pocket on the front of that baking sheet. And that is just stuck on, I believe, with double stick tape, it feels like, because I can kind of pull it away. Yeah, so I just did this. This is just stuck down with this double stick tape, okay? And then I went on to my next signature. So really, this is the next signature. So that vellum, I didn't wrap vellum here because I already had it at the end of that one. So then I did it at the beginning of the next one. So does that make sense? You could put another vellum here, but to me it was just kind of unnecessary because it's in a journal. It's not, you're not going to write on it. You know, it's really serves no other purpose than I wanted kind of a transition thing. So I ended up, this middle one does not have vellum. It just has the baking paper as a divider. Okay. So a blank divider, I start my signature, my next blank divider, and then my next signature has the vellum again. And on this one, again, I went ahead and made it a little pocket because I don't have anything on here. I don't need too many blank pages. So that's kind of my thinking, you know, and then again, I end with my blank. So that was kind of my fronts and backs of my signatures, and I'm going to do that in the second one too. So the next thing I was thinking is I needed to start thinking of my mercantile. That's going to be my first signature. And so I'm kind of just rolling around things in my head, like what would I see in a mercantile? Well, back then it's going to be all your kind of staples and fabric and, you know, that kind of thing. People had their gardens and they had cows and hens. So it's not like a grocery store. I mean, there are, you know, your dry goods and that kind of thing that you're buying there. But it's really, you know, maybe it's also a pharmacy. It's also a, you know, it could be a soda fountain too. The town we moved from, Paso Robles, it had, when we first moved there, they actually had downtown on the park, old-fashioned pharmacy, you know, mom and pop kind of thing that had a soda fountain in the front. And you know, that wasn't too long ago. So I kind of started thinking about that, and it kind of got me to thinking, okay, I will probably want to use some of my, you know, my grungy papers and my wallpaper, you know, papers. I'm using my originals in my book. So I wanted to show you how these are like half-size sheets. How am I going to use a half-size sheet when my pages need to be bigger? So I had a couple of ways that I did it in here. I'm going to show you that real quick, just because I think I'm going to do one in this first. You know, I'm trying to kind of make this easier on myself. And so I'm using this kind of as a guide. So I may want to do something. I did this as the front door of the house. So I may want to do something that's the outside, you know, of building one of the outside photos of it. But then the thing I had done is I had this, one of my pages folded in half the small way. So all your pages don't have to be full size. So I thought I'm going to do that kind of thing where it's going to wrap around. The other half of it should be back here somewhere, is here. You know, so that is my next page, was a little small page. So I think I'm going to do something like that in this. So I picked out one of my original papers. In that one, I just had the single layer because I had painted on both sides. So I could use just a single layer. For the two that I chose for this one, I really wanted to use this paper because this reminds me of a tin ceiling, and maybe in that mercantile, the top of it is a tin ceiling. I don't know. So I really kind of liked that paper for the next one, but it was one that I painted on a new piece of paper, so there's nothing, you know, grungy on the inside. So I thought, well, I'll just grab a different one. So I grabbed one that wasn't very nice on the other side either. And then I'm thinking kind of a corner pocket sort of thing. Now I won't go and sew this or do anything to it yet until I get all my papers, because it's going to start, as I grab different ones, it's going to start revealing a story in my mind. And then that will determine maybe what I do with it, what I'm going to put inside of it. So that's just kind of how my brain works. The other way that you can add in those smaller sized pages is to do what I did here. I think you'll be able to see better if I take these out. So you can't really tell because they look similar, but they are different. So this is actually 2 different book pages that I had painted, and I just chose 2 that had similar color and that. But what I did was, so that I could sew them into my signature, and this is actually the center of my signature, is I just took those 2 papers, and I don't know if you can even really tell because they're so tight, but that's just one sheet, and then the other side is another one. And so I just did the same thing. I used an actual needle and just punched holes like I would a sewing machine, but I hand stitched it. And then I liked seeing this grungy fabric here. So I actually took the side, I mean, it was going to show one side or the other anyway. So I made it be the center of my signature, and I just glued it down to the papers and then stitched it too, just for extra oomph and just that extra detail. So even though I have, you know, these kind of smaller pieces, I can cut them and put 2 of them together and just make a hinge. And that hinge could be fabric or it could be paper or anything, but I like mixing up the materials. So I really like using the fabric for hinges because it's just very durable. So I'll put these back in a bit. And the other thing that I thought of for that first one is fabrics are going to be in that mercantile, and I love fabric and I've done a lot of sewing in my life, so I definitely want to include some fabric and sewing kind of things in that signature. But the problem is I don't have a lot of fabrics like that would have been found there. So I thought, what do I have, or what can I do? So one thing I did have that I remembered that I just love is these little old Shakespeare books. And the inside papers are a really pretty aged floral. And I thought that would be a really cute fabric. So I scanned it, and then I just took a part of it that looked pretty clean, printed and blew it up so that I could print it on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. I just did this one on a piece of paper just as a test print. I'm not really wild for this project, maybe how big the scale of the floral. I wish I could have it somewhere in between. So I may just make it like a 1/2 page big and then another 1/2 page big so that it could be scaled smaller. So I may play around with that a little bit more. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it would be more like, instead of a little square here that's blown up this big, it will be more like that, you know, blown up that big. So my scale of my floral will still be tiny. So I'm going to work on something like that. And then I can print this onto fabric. So I wanted to kind of show you, you know, my thought process, because you may have inside book covers or something like that that you like the pattern of, that you would like it to be either in a paper or in a fabric. So you can scan, you know, anything that you can lay flat. So I've scanned that, and then it got me to thinking about other fabrics and things that I might have. The other thing I could have done is I could have, this is actually one of my coffee stain papers that I made, and I printed it out just on white copy paper because I could layer those two, you know, to make it look grungy. So I'm going to play around with some things like that. I'm just showing you these things so that if I do end up putting freebies or a kit, you'll have access to those. So then the next thing I did was I thought, okay, I need to find what fabrics do I have. So I found, let's see. Oh, I should show you this. So this piece, I'm going to probably do a few. When I did my spines on my vellum, I was using some of the rusted out fabric that I did. I'm going to probably put a couple of pieces of scanned into my freebie file in case you don't want to rust out your fabric. And I'll pick some different colored ones, like this one's rust, but some of them came out more like this, less black even, you know, just grungy. So I'll probably put 2 or 3 pieces in there, different color options that you can print out if you don't want to rust out your own fabric. So I will show you how you can print on fabric, but this one is one of them, just printed on fabric. So you can do it, and you can do it double-sided if you wanted, but for, you know, if you're gluing it down as a spine or covering something, you're not going to see the backside anyway. So I will make a couple of those available. And then I grabbed a couple of things that fabrics that I did have. So I don't have the original. This is the copy. This is the original. So I took some fabric that was new fabric, and I'll show you a new piece. I do have a few pieces of vintage fabric that I've gotten, but just a couple. So I had like 2 that had come from my mother-in-law, and this was one of them, and then there was another red kind of floral. So I thought, I want to make them look old and grungy, but at least it's kind of the fabric that you might, you know, see there. I kept kind of thinking in my mind, like, you know, flour sacks and that kind of thing. So maybe you have some old flour sacks or flour sack fabric, you know, the printed ones. So I thought, I'm going to take that and see if I can age it. So the first thing I did was I cut it to 8.5 by 11 size, and I needed to scan it. So the way that I found to scan that was easiest, if you just laid a piece of fabric down on your scanner, and even when you iron it, there's going to maybe be wrinkles, or it's not going to lay totally flat. Do you know what I mean? It's going to just be, there might be something off on it. So I decided what would work is if I took my fabric and I took one of these label sheets that I use for printing on fabric, I took one of these, and it actually worked because I wasn't using it to print on the fabric. I was using it to scan the fabric. It worked for like 6 times. So that was nice. So all you do is take the sticky backing off and then put it on your piece of ironed fabric. That way you don't have any wrinkles. It's nice and flat and smooth. And then you lay it on your scanner, you know, close it down, and everything's nice and flat because it's stuck to a piece of paper. So I scanned my fabrics before I did anything to them. I scanned them front and back, because the back side, to me, if I'm wanting this to look old and grungy and faded, the back side is actually going to be better to work with than the front side. So I took a couple of different ones. This one here's another one I did. This one was actually an old Western shirt that I had taken apart. This is the original fabric that I had made an apron out of it and had just the back left. So I had a couple of pieces of that. So I scanned them before I did anything to them, and then I aged them and made them look grungy, and then I scanned them again. So that way I'll have access now to play around with the color of the originals if I want, or of the scanned dirty ones. So to do this, I just took my vintage photo. I used vintage photo oxide. I used some vintage photo stain, and I used some antique linen stain. So use whatever you have that are in those kind of tea stain. You can tea stain this too, but this was just a quick way, like just in minutes, to do just these 2 pieces. So I do have to have a shout out to Nola Factor. She had a great tip for my mat, is to put saran wrap on the glass because it'll stick, and then it's easy cleanup after. So I actually did that. I don't know how it would look on camera, so I pulled it up, but I just laid my saran wrap out, and then I took my sprays and sprayed them around on the saran wrap, and then sprayed a little bit of water on top of that, and then just laid this down as if I was doing paper, and then I just smooshed it up and kind of got it everywhere. And then if you spray a little directly on, you can see those darker spots, you know, spray a little bit right on here and there, And then I went and took it to the sink and kind of rinsed it so it all really kind of yellowed the whole thing. And then just threw it in the dryer real quick. So that was just a way to age some fabric really fast. Like I said, I did that piece, and then I did a couple of these. So they just look like an old, you know, yellowed mattress or kind of an old distressed thing. So these will be some things that I make available too, whether they're in the kit or in the freebies, we'll decide. And then I keep this, I've shown this in the last one, just keep a piece of scrap fabric around so that you can clean up even your saran wrap after. And then you'll eventually have a nice other grungy piece of fabric that you can use for reinforcing things, that kind of thing. So this one is one I had just printed it on paper. Oh, and you can see I did figure out how to print borderless on my printer. I'm going to do a printer review, but I'm waiting because they're actually shipping me a new printer. So that's a long story, but very good customer service. I should have it this week. I'm still using the one that my original one. But we're having some issues, so they're going to just send me a new one. Anyway, so I did figure out how to print borderless. So when I do that review, I actually had to use Epson's little photo thing to do it, but it works fine. And then I tried to think again of what other fabrics I might have that you would find in a mercantile. And I thought of burlap, which I have some new burlap. And I'll show you kind of how I scanned and did that. And then I had these actual coffee sacks. So I cut a piece of my actual coffee sack. And then I also had these French grain sacks. So I cut a piece of that. So I cut them 8.5 by 11 so that I could scan them again. And I'll show you kind of how I did that on this one. So for the burlap and the coffee sack, when I scan it, I don't want to see that white sticker through there. And, you know, I even tried to just kind of lay this one flat, and it does better on sticker. So I happen to have some of this brown craft vinyl sticker. So that way I'm seeing brown through there, and I was able to get a really good scan of that. So this is just some burlap. And burlap comes in a lot of different colors. You can tell this one's kind of, I think, called Idaho potato, but I have some that are lighter too. So I may do a whole series of these kind of things in a kit as backgrounds and make them available. Those will be in my Etsy shop. So I have to work on that still, but I think that will happen. I even have several of these grain sacks, so they all kind of come out a little bit different. Some of them have more of a herringbone pattern on them, and some are thicker than others. So I have gone ahead and scanned these 3, and I will do some more, I think, because I really liked how it came out. But I wanted to show you how this one turned out. So this is the original. You can see the color's different because I didn't adjust anything. I would need to adjust it a little to get it exactly like this. But I wanted to show you how they printed. So this is actually printed on fabric. Now the fabric I printed it on is not as textural as this. It's not as thick, but you can see the dimension of it. So even though it's kind of a smooth fabric, I still have it on my sticky back paper. So to print on fabric, I just used this white cotton fabric to print it. You'll be able to see the other side when I peel it off, but I just use this white cotton fabric. You iron it, attach it to one of those stickers, the sticky back sticker. You know, you peel off the backing, put the fabric on, and then trim around the edge, you know, so it's going to fit in your printer. I just do it from the back so I can see, and then make sure you get any of these little threads that might pull off and get stuck in your printer. Get those off first. And then I just do it through my back feeder, and it comes out just great. So then you can pull this off. So that was my original sticky. Sometimes these are sticky enough to reuse a second or even a third time. This one might not be because I left it on here overnight, but this is sticky enough for me to use to scan something because I'm not going to be running it through my feeder. So I can just stick this back onto its backing and save it for later. And then I have my fabric. And you could print on both sides if you wanted, you know, stick this side down and print a different one on that side, and you'd have reversible fabric. So that's just a fun thing to do, you know, if you don't have a bunch of fabric. This just, you know, with one piece, now I can have fabric forever of that one. Okay, so this was taking that, the coffee sack, and I thought it might be fun as a pocket. And so I wanted it maybe on something sturdier, so I just printed it onto craft cardstock. And that way it's heavier duty, but you just see all that texture in it. So that was just another thing. So, you know, if you don't have a lot of fabrics, then you can maybe find a photo of fabric that you like, or like I did, the inside of a book cover, or maybe you have a piece of clothing in your closet, and obviously you're not going to cut it up to do it, but you can just put your sticky back on a set part of it flattened out, and then kind of fold all the rest of it up, you know, so that you just have the 8.5 by 11 piece on your glass of your scanner, and then scan it. So I don't know, I just thought that was an idea. There may be copyright issues or whatever if you're trying to sell it, but I think just for yourself, you're not selling fabric yardage. Okay, so I think that is, was there anything else I wanted to cover? I can't remember now. The printing on different things and printing on fabric, and I think I need to just start continuing work on my kits that I'm gonna have, because I'd like to, in case you don't have coffee stained paper, that kind of thing, I was hoping to have at least a couple of pieces of just kind of plain. That way you can print them out if you need to have just some extra coffee dyed paper that you can print out and use. I happen to have some pieces that when I did the first volume, I had some extra pieces that I had already cut to size that I could use, some graph paper that's coffee stained. So I can use, you know, these different things. The other thing, like before I mentioned, you don't have to have each page be the size of your largest page. You know, they can stagger and be different sizes. So I kind of take whatever length I have and then just fold it up to make a pocket. And then you just have to cut this side to make it fit. So, you know, stuff like that. This is, actually might be this piece that I copied to use. And then some ledger, you know, ledger paper. This will be good for the mercantile one. This is just some school construction paper. And some journal paper. Oh, I'd already started this one apparently. So just had glued it to make a little pocket. So I just need to kind of go through. I'd like to find some vintage ledger paper or something that with writing on it, maybe that I can print onto something like this, or even print onto fabric. So I'm going to get back to work on mine. I just wanted to kind of give you a little help maybe in kind of making some of your own papers and that sort of thing too, if you want. So have a great rest of your day, and go make something. Bye.